Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you happenstance to this Truth Bomb riff. My name is Patrick Lovell, and I am so grateful to be joined by the illustrious team of the new Untouchables. And we're recording on Friday, June 6th, which is obviously a very important day considering everything that we're all in the midst of. Um, and I'll wax poetic on that just in a moment, but I want to do some introductions first because we have a new addition to this particular recording, and that's my longtime colleague that I'm going to introduce first here on the upper right, a gentleman by the name of Eric Vaughn, who needs no introduction to the group here on the screen, but to the audience itself. Eric and I have been working together for years, both in filmmaking and documentary process, and we are the team that brought the con to the world, featuring the folks that are obviously here. And it's going to be amazing. On my upper left, we have Mark Dan from the Dan Law Firm and the great state of Ohio. Immediately below him on my screen is June Carbone, the Rabina Chair of Science, Technology, and Law at the University of Minnesota. And to her immediate right, of course, is the legendary William K. Black. And I know that will make you blush because it's just William K. Black for anybody who knows, but obviously a gentleman who we've relied on for a long time for guidance in this tumultuous time period that seems to never end, quite frankly. And I prefaced D-Day because, of course, on this fateful day, the United States and our allies had to exert tremendous sacrifice to break the iron wall of obviously the fascist defense forces in Europe. That would then lead to the liberation of Europe and everything that has morphed our world since. But of course, we find ourselves a day after the roller coaster circus on display of this clown show that includes, of course, our president, Donald J. Trump, and of course, the richest man in the world, Elon Musk. I find it incredible considering this team here that really, in the end, it's the law that's going to have to turn the tables on the lawless nature of what we're in the midst of that, of course, creates fascism, which has always been pretty much my ultimate goal and North Star is to defeat fascism whenever and however possible. Although I have learned that you never defeat the enemy, and it's not necessary to hope to persevere. So, look, guys, I think I want to toss the question first here to June because you have been interacting with folks, particularly describing power as really the focal point of what it is that we need to understand. And of course, your work over decades through your books and everything else that I'll include links in the discovery below is the subject through which you've had a great deal of research for years and years. Can you kind of set up how you're responding to this incredible display of, I don't know, embarrassment really, but undergirded by really the subject of power, which would be London.
Sure. Well, when you move from institutionalized power to personalized power, you select for people characterized by narcissism, uh, often sociopathy, the willingness to use other people to accomplish aims, transactional leadership. What did you do for me in the last week, uh, or yesterday? And when you select for that type of people, you build in instability. You build in instability because of leadership style, but it's also like, the description of Game of Thrones. There can't be two alpha males in the same room. So they're using each other, jockeying for position, and the moment one feels they're slipping, uh, in the war of all against all, the knives are bared. And that's what we've seen. I mean, these are two con men uh, who want all of the riches for themselves and are looking for the angle. And the moment they're not on top, they're losing. If they're not getting everything, they're losing. And losing is the biggest threat to their egos, not to mention their fortunes. The latest news flash is Elon Musk's holding in Tesla took a $34 billion hit today.
Wow. And again, interesting from the perspective is it turns everything upside down and inside out. And it feels like the whole house of cards is falling right before our eyes, Bill. I want to kind of get your assessment as an introduction, particularly as it relates to what's on the horizon here collectively, hopefully for all of us, but also for the nation writ large, where there's going to be, as I teased at the beginning, today is D-Day, but what are we as a people, a nation, a country, supposedly where we, the people, are the power? But of course, conversely, that's been under siege for quite some time, especially from your prolific work and what you've revealed to us over the years. But at the moment, it's like the criminality, the fraud, all of those things, not to mention the perversion of markets, really comes to mind for me, especially as it relates to government subsidies. $39 billion loss in a day because everybody knows that Donald Trump is threatening, of course, to pull government contracts from all of the collective empire building, I guess, of Elon Musk, who's been living on government subsidies, if you will, for some time, while at the same time trying to do what? Doge, which is where this intersection all happened with either the big, beautiful bill or the slim, beautiful bill. It's all, quite frankly, ridiculous. Where do you come in on this, Bill?
Hey, we have a fabulous opportunity. This is an enormous gift, and it's going to be a test of whether the Democrats in particular manage to squander it. Okay? We have both.
I'll offer you better than even money on that.
Don't tempt me, Mark. I'd short my own bet. Okay. Okay. So we have both of the principles saying out loud without understanding that they're doing it, that they are involved in complete sleaze. And that they know they're involved in complete sleaze. And to pick up June's point, it's entirely transactional because they've got no moral principles. They care nothing about the people of America. They care nothing about America. It is entirely about them and what have you done for me lately? And if you're going to take me on, I'm going to go to kill the king. Or as the king, I'm going to go and kill you. But back to the Democrats' opportunity to, rise or fail. State legislative hearings. Immediately. Subpoena Musk as a witness. Invite Donald Trump to testify. Have a chair for Donald Trump. If he doesn't choose to use it, take pictures of the chair. Or better yet, have little things that pop up about what Donald Trump has said about Elon Musk in that chair. All the juicy stuff, right? The President of the United States has openly said he knew Musk was there for corrupt purposes and he, the president, facilitated that. And it's only because Trump has broken with him that he's going to now declare an unholy war to destroy him using the powers of the king and the immunity that the Supreme Court has given him. He feels he can, in the open, say that he's going to do these things to destroy this man, right? Who he knows to have been sleazy, and he put him in place to allow him, to aid him to be sleazy. And we have Musk testifying that I'm the reason this man is president. Not testifying, but
Right.
stating publicly.
Yeah.
I am the reason this man is president. But for me and my unbelievably massive contributions, he would not be the president of the United States. So those are absolutely appropriate legislative leading. Consider a whole passel of conflict of interest. Anybody that has a nexus to Musk, any state that has a nexus to Musk and his operations, which is pretty much everybody because it's a big friggin' company, should have those subpoenas out this next week, right? And then what we've talked about, don't do your conventional hearing where you get 3 minutes per person and there's all this stuff, in the opposition and such. Have somebody serve as counsel who will do the questioning. And if you have control over the rules, and in almost all states, you can say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get an hour and a half or 2 hours and a half or whatever of questioning. Then the other side can have 2 hours, whatever, the same amount of questioning time. And you do that twice, and you make it a 3-day hearing. And you call other experts that explain why this kind of corruption destroys America and destroys a market system. So, Democrats. Now, remember what Mark's instant reaction was. I want you to disappoint Mark.
Amen.
Well, on that note, I'm gonna, obviously you got plenty to run with, Mark, but just if you would, I mean, the thing that I saw this morning that I thought was so fascinating, in addition to everything else that's, unveiling, but particularly from the sources we have access to, who are experts in all things, legal unraveling of fraud, right? And of course, in the context of the Supreme Court's murkiness, right? Because what constitutes everything we've been in the midst of is the fact that Eric and I had the great opportunity to go on a great adventure of discovery through all of you guys that would then provide all of the detail that would then, be a part of the indictment / trial to the grand jury, I suppose, of the American people. But that notwithstanding, Jennifer Taub said this morning, just like Bill did, when just looking at the written evidence and what was stated in that volley of what we watched unleashed yesterday in this mayhem of just circus, everybody's, who doesn't know any better is focusing in on almost like they're eating popcorn. How many times have we seen this meme where it's like it's entertainment, right? But meanwhile, they're literally providing the details that professionals like you could use based on the actual, the bar of intent and / all of those other elements that are criminal in the context of, or civil, depending on how you're going to unravel it. But I mean, my God, quid pro quo, we just saw it unravel in the email thread in the chronology of what went down yesterday that Bill just demonstrated. Can you start there, Mark, and then maybe work into your patented lost opportunity for the Democrats and what we can do to make sure that doesn't happen?
Just give me 15 seconds. You subpoena not just the witness, you subpoena documents, but you start the hearings next week.
Yeah, I think time is of the essence. We have a country with a very short attention span, and so I think you have to seize those opportunities when they come. And I think that's what Democrats have been particularly bad at least since in the 150 days since Trump's been president. Well, this spurs a lot of things to think about. I could expand Bill's suggestion to include congressional Democrats can hold hearings, not just in their districts, but in the districts of where persuadable voters reside, and ask the questions that need to be asked, and bring in the experts to explain what's going on. Attorneys general can convene hearings. We used a little known power in the AG's office to investigate potential consumer fraud issues. this would be a great opportunity for state AGs to exercise that power. I held hearings all over the state on payday lending that laid the groundwork ultimately for the state, for Ohio having now the best payday lending law in the country. But an attorney general hadn't held one of those hearings, I think, in ever. But the Model Consumer Fraud Act has those provisions in it, and so the AGs can be doing it. So it doesn't have to just be limited there. The departments of commerce that regulate the auto dealers, the folks that are in charge of highways and safety, and because a lot of the quid pro quo that was going on related to making these Teslas less safe, and allowing that to happen. So, but I think there's a kind of a nuanced connection here between what we all did and what you and Eric did. I'm so glad to see you, Eric. You think the military parade is going to be great next week? Eric they had 3 Goodyear blimps flying over Akron yesterday.
Yes, they did.
All 3, and it's I think it's been 100 years since all the blimps were united for a show of force. So that's and Eric is the pride of Akron, Ohio. So, but here's what I think Trump got elected for the very reasons that you two were able to bring to life in your documentary, which is that people had a suspicion that everybody was taking care of each other behind the scenes, and that the very rich were able to buy themselves a different level of justice than everybody else. We had a 2-tiered system of justice. So ironically, I think that was a lot of what went in, and a lot of people who were affected by the mortgage crisis are particularly strong Trump supporters now, people who lost their homes in particular. So he part of the reason people voted for him is because he was going to break that old boy network, that old and that all under the surface stuff. Now his remedy is not at all, I think, what people hoped for and expected, but because his remedy is just to do it out in the open, and that's not a remedy at all. And so the Democrats need to. And again, I hate to keep agreeing with David Brooks because he made this point in the New York Times today. The Democrats need to position themselves as people who are going to hold the rich and powerful accountable within the bounds of the rule of law, but whether it's transparent or secret, they're going to root it out and get it over with, and finally end this 2-tier system of economics and justice that's been oppressing working class people for the last 50 years. And I think there's a huge opportunity there that will be missed immediately. But I hope it'll be there. But I have a couple of other observations. I also think that that we're starting to see the unraveling of the business community's support for Trump, not just Musk, because he's an outlier in the business community. But I run a business. I have 26 employees in my law firm. I run a business. I could not possibly run this business not knowing what the cost of my lawyers are going to be, what the law, what the expected law is going to be in the coming months, the cost of support staff. And anybody who's running a business that involves manufacturing, importing, exporting parts, they must be at a complete standstill. No rational person could operate a business in this environment for exactly the reason we saw with Trump and Musk, just at an exaggerated level. And that is that, well, today we're for this and tomorrow it's going to be different. We see it with the tariffs, tariffs on, tariffs off, different tariffs today. How do you plan? How do you order for Christmas? How do you make sure you have supplies to be able to buy things that people want? So that's a whole different component. And honestly, I think business people who are seeing this ought to start to speak up and tell the story of how hard it is to run their business in a lawless world.
If you don't mind, just to build on what you're saying there, Mark, I think that you're spot on as far as like this entire like sort of tariff concept of being a replacement for tax, income tax, and what have you. I mean, a lot of that, and also about repatriating businesses and so on and so forth. A lot of that is going to require that. Okay, so just let me back up a second here. It seems like all of Trump's policies are with this idea that we're going to repatriate manufacturing, we're going to be doing all this stuff, and then we'll be able to be buying our own goods. It's like what person who has the ability or the collected capital in order to create a manufacturing plant that would be required to replace the same manufacturing plant that's in China or Vietnam or wherever it may be, who in their right mind would put that kind of capital into that kind of an expense? Something that's going to require years and years and years, to finally come online. It's impossible to do that. And so the requirement to make what Trump is doing to make sense is the exact thing that he's preventing anybody from reasonably thinking about.
And while the jobs report was good this week, although we're not sure of the data anymore because they fired a bunch of the folks that compile it apparently. But the bulk of American jobs are now small businesses and medium-sized businesses, and not large companies. Large companies are starting to lay people off. But what's going to happen here is at a certain point, with this uncertainty, small manufacturers, small folks that do drop shipping and all those kinds of things, the people that deliver the packages, there's going to be just a massive layoff coming, and which is going to trigger a very, very serious economic consequence. And we're already seeing that people have less and less money to spend. I mean, that data is coming in loud and clear. But the business people who are affected need to stop hiding and stop focusing on their lifelong determination to see government spending reduced, and their dream coming true, and focus on what this means for them. And the Democrats need to help focus that, and that can be the subject of hearings as well. What are they doing to the business community here? How can you plan? Why can't every state now? Every state's got development folks. The state's deeply involved in economic development. Every state in the country is, and there are whole committees of every legislature that's devoted to that. They should be parading these affected business people in front of them to talk about what's going on, and to see if we can come up with some state level proposals to try to create that level of stability, or even create a fund to try to bail out people that are ultimately affected by this. But we're going to see a big strain on unemployment. We're going to see so many different things.
I'm going to circle back to you, Mark, because the next half of this dialogue, I want to get into our plan moving forward. But I'm inclined to go right to June because of her expertise, particularly in everything. I mean, over the last 3 months, June has been setting up every aspect of what we're seeing in our face right now. But I want to say something first to Eric, just really quickly. Eric, first of all, I apologize if I didn't appropriately introduce you, because from the standpoint of what you're doing now, especially with everybody on this platform, on this podcast today and moving forward and so forth. Congratulations on the platform Corruption Incorporated, the American Way, because what you're doing in an ongoing basis is demonstrating with the speed of what you can accomplish, with your production apparatus, is to take all of these pieces of information and get them to the population at the speed that we need to get and to penetrate with some of these messages that everybody is sharing here. And before I move on, I want to ask you this question real quick, in terms of look, a couple of the subjects that you and Bill have pursued this week, particularly, I found very fascinating as it related to a Palantir being involved with AI as it relates to Fannie. But further to that, what we heard from another discussion with Jennifer Taub this morning and the gentleman who has been Collins, who I believe is the publisher of The Onion, they got into a part of the dialogue where they also were discussing the implied guarantee through a whole structure of what you and I have been able to get behind the scenes to understand guarantees, for example, in this crazy system that's dependent on corruption and authoritarianism. Can you kind of just give me, I don't know, maybe a 60,000 foot view of what you're looking at, given everything that's playing out today and the last week?
Yeah, I mean, I think to get into into everything that we talked about, that we basically bogart the entire rest of this program. But I think that as far as like Palantir goes, and Bill, you're going to be able to speak more intelligently about this than I am. But Palantir has a purpose as an organization. It's out there for a particular reason, and whatever it is that they're saying that they're doing with one government department or another might not necessarily have anything to do with what their ends actually are. And so I think that, if they're selling to the Trump administration, I think in particular, and his supporters, that they're going to be doing this, this, and this, um, that might not necessarily have anything to do with what their actual ends are. But I think, Bill, I'd rather hand this to you just because I think that you're able to encapsulate it better than I am.
Okay, so this, very much, in my view, fits in with how June started things out. This would be the no kings, another aspect of it. And another place, as Mark said, there we can do far, far more with the Democratic legislatures and with the Democratic AGs than is being done now. So, for example, the Palantir story, the broader story, is this competition among sleazy entities, them, the Meta story from the whistleblower, who they're suppressing, where they had a congressional bipartisan hearing that just carved a tiny bit out that the Republicans were willing to talk about, but none of the truly horrendous things that Meta was doing, much less the sexist aspects as well to the individual whistleblower there. But this competition between Black Cube and Palantir and Meta for who can be the sleaziest hoovering up of information to create the totalitarian state should be the subject of hearings in every state and, of course, in Congress. In prior shows, I've explained how the Democrats really need to change how they approach conducting hearings and not focus. They have to save the country as opposed to their jobs at this time. And I'll just leave it with, don't be Ro Khanna. So Ro Khanna's reaction to all of this thing was Musk is, wow, the Democrats should be rushing to embrace Musk and and
No.
abundance,
That's the
theory.
last thing.
Like,
That's the last thing.
God.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's incredible. And by the way, there is a fissure happening with those that are coming into the protests that are aware of that. And many people on the signs throughout the country and these protests are not asking for that. And so how out of touch? I mean, I'm being rhetorical, but I got to bring this back to you, June, because
Just 1 second on this is one of our family rules. It is impossible to compete with unintentional self-parody. And the Democrats, you just can't compete with.
Right. So June, this is extraordinary from this standpoint as well, right? So for the past several months, I've heard among unbelievable revelations with just about every sentence that you've been kind enough to reveal to us based on your research with your colleagues and so forth. But the nature of the tech bros, the psychology, the nature of their sort of, shall we say, web just over the course of decades, alongside financial deregulation and some of these other things that would come into play here. But there is this extraordinary Jesse Armstrong project on HBO right now. They put it together very quickly. It's called Mountainhead. And it features, this is a fictional depiction of what we're in the midst of. And Jesse Armstrong is a gentleman who's a great writer director. He built his TV series based loosely, not loosely, it was pretty parallel to a fictional depiction of the Murdoch family and Fox. Mm-hmm. That was called Succession. His latest offering is called Mountainhead, but the four principles are all tech bros, and they demonstrate everything that you've been revealing to us over the course of the last several months, quite frankly. Okay. But as this art imitates, reality, and you can't make this stuff up because, truth is stranger than fiction, right? Because of what we're seeing between Palantir and Peter Thiel and Elon Musk versus Trump and who's got the control and everything else. One of the subplots of this Mountainhead story was, as the story progresses, we learn these guys are tech bros. They're giants in the tech industry, and they're together because each one needs to fill in the other's sort of apparatus to fully complement what they're actually in the midst of, which is literally the hostile takeover of the world. And to that point, they literally demonstrate that at one point, one of the actors suggests, hey, wait a second, you're talking about doing a coup in the United States, but doesn't that engage, obviously, aircraft carriers and nuclear weapons and special forces and all of these things? And one of the other guys are like, well, we back channel all of the information control of everything that's going on. And what ultimately this demonstrates is that through this authoritarianism, through this, let's call it Curtis Yarvin, philosophy and what you guys have been experiencing in Silicon Valley for the last 20 years, it all emulates what you've been telling us, right? And so here is this moment, again, where the other side of what you've demonstrated to us, and it doesn't, escape me that it's June 6th, D-Day, right? You have told us over and over and over, history informs us that, yeah, it only took a Great Depression, or well, I should say 2 world wars and a Great Depression for liberty through all of the elements that would maybe become the New Deal and all of those sorts of things, which is just democracy when we think about it, right? Who has the power? Okay, so that's enough, ramp up. The moment, June, is encapsulated in both what I just laid out and what you've been telling us. So in terms of the American people's approach to this, right, and response, if they go the wrong direction with somebody like you said, Ro Khanna, playing ball for the kleptocrats, game over, right? Maybe you could give us some more insight based on really the wisdom that you've been exploring for the last several months.
Sure. And I had wanted to follow up on Mark's comments, but I want to make several points here. First, on this idea of history, what takes place in the 19th century is the advent of industrialization, which destabilizes the entire developed world. And what you end up with as you begin the entry into the 20th century, besides massive corruption, is the consolidation of power. And the consolidation of power moves into finance. So you talk about Thorstein Veblen in, The Great Critic, 1910, about the fat cats. They move from making things to making money. It is finance that's the secret. When you look at Silicon Valley, we are now moving from the startup phase. All these individual companies that rose from what seemed to be nothing, created empires, and are now at the stage where they're no longer new. This is the period of consolidation of power. But what's the basis for power? Data. This is not about armies. It is about data. And the chilling story of today is the Supreme Court on the shadow docket again, where it's messing with TROs, that is, preliminary orders by district courts to just keep things in place long enough to find out what's really going on. And what does the Supreme Court do? It says to the Trump administration, Doge wants data, give it to them. The courts can't stand in the way. That's our most recent lawless. Why lawless? Because the shadow docket, this expedited procedure with no briefing, interfering with district court decisions that are in the process of getting information. The Supreme Court is stopping them in their tracks based on what seem to be procedural rulings nobody pays attention to, but it's all about amassing data as the source of power. And that's what Silicon Valley is built on today. So I'd be very worried about that. But I want to go back to Mark's point about small businesses, and I want to talk about the antidote to this. And I think it's twofold. So if you look at the Trump coalition and you say, who's there? There are two huge components of the Trump coalition. When we look at the MAGA base, we're looking at a bunch of people, a lot of them. You want to predict who's a Republican? Small business types. Dentists are much more Republican than doctors. Why? Because doctors often work for large hospital corporations. Dentists are small businessmen. Every small businessman hates regulation. Okay? They're all Republicans. But the MAGA types, the real MAGA types, Trump personally gives their lives meaning they didn't have. And then there are the people who hate Democrats, which include small businessmen because they identify Democrats with regulators. What Democrats have to start thinking about is how we develop those two poles, those two bases for a political coalition. There's going to be a moment when the economy crashes, and people are going to be looking for villains. And Trump has set himself up to blame Musk. His base doesn't like Musk. They never did. I think Trump has already won that war. And the only question is, how far is he going? Steve Bannon's suggestion is we nationalize SpaceX and deport Musk, and that should terrify the business community. That is communism. It's certainly authoritarianism. But there's going to be a large part of the company looking for villains, and we have to think about how to supply them. There are lots to choose from. But the other step, and this is the harder step, is where does meaning come from? So at the height of the industrial era, Henry Ford is the brilliant innovator who comes up with the idea of the $5 a day job, later became known as the family wage, doubled the standard wage in the era, became pickier about who they selected, but ultimately provided lifelong employment. And when the unions in the 50s tried to build on that, they fought for secure employment ahead of higher wages. And that's the foundation of the era of industrial peace and prosperity in the middle of the 20th century. Where does security come from today? Democrats should be shouting from the hilltops. The big ugly bill is aimed at you, bros. It's aimed at small businesses. It will decimate state budgets throughout the country. It will decimate the most in the welfare states, all those Republican states that receive a whole lot more federal tax money than they pay in. It will, the insecurity in business, but also the loss of consumer demand will destroy small businesses. And Doge took a meat axe to change saw, in their words, to many of the things that make up the social safety net that gets you through a business downturn. We ought to recognize the jobs the bros have are a whole lot more insecure than the jobs in healthcare and education that women typically have. And they're the people who are most hurt. Right now, it's the Republican Party that tends to benefit from economic uncertainty unless we make them the targets. And until this moment, The Democrats have been idiots at two things. One, identifying Republicans as the source of the economic insecurity that bedevils most of the country, including the white collar workers about to be replaced by AI. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene says, oh, they're not letting the states regulate AI? How terrible. I didn't know that was in the bill. Um, but you also need an alternative agenda that gives meaning to people. So Stacey Abrams is talking about how wherever there's voter suppression, she goes in at the local level, works with people who know voter suppression is aimed at them, focuses on city council positions, and is trying to engineer a political revolution that gets people to identify with her movement. That's what we need. We need villains, and we be shouting now about what's about to take down the US economy. And we need heroes. We need a source of meaning for the people in the trenches. And I would suggest thinking about small businesses as a place where Democrats ought to be building a base is a good way to start.
Let me
On
just
that note, I'd like to suggest that we've got about 15 minutes less in this broadcast, unless you guys want to go further. But Bill, I think June just set you up perfectly from the standpoint that next week we're going to have an opportunity. I'm scheduled, but we've got a lot of work in progress to where hopefully everybody on this screen, in addition to those who have also participated with us, will represent the new Untouchables in a plan to move forward, given everything that unfortunately, like you said, Rokana being one, has yet to be able to identify, and we could go on down the list, right? But here we have an opportunity with the No Kings. We have an opportunity with a population beside themselves, overwhelmed with this onslaught of everything from Doge to what we're in the midst of, and everything on a day-to-day basis, where it's so difficult to get traction to see a vision and pathway forward. However, you've developed the fight plan as well as another element of it. I don't know if you want to go into it in detail, but if you could give us maybe as much as you're comfortable with at the moment, because this will set the stage for hopefully Mark to be able to add further offerings by what you've already planted the seed of in this platform that can be integrated. How do we, the new Untouchables, respond given the moment?
Well, we don't have time to do anything other than an example. And so the example is whistleblowers, right? And whistleblowers are going to have multiple problems. One of the problems they're going to have in the modern era is confidentiality agreements. And those will be heard by rent-a-judge, retired judges who are extraordinarily pro-corporation under principles in which the corporation always wins, and they won't be allowed to talk. And if they do talk, they'll face, ruinous civil penalties in essence. We need legislatures, or where possible, as Mark has talked about, attorney generals issuing subpoenas requiring the testimony of these people, which will break the ability of these rent-a-judges and the secrecy agreements to prevent the public from learning what's happened. In addition, the Trump administration will go after the whistleblowers. It will go after them civilly. It'll try to go after them criminally. Not all of them, but many of them. They will seek deliberately to intimidate. And so we're going to need the bar to come forward and represent them. The usual thing with whistleblowers, right, is under this law passed during the Civil War to deal with fraud, in particular, that was endangering the lives of Union soldiers. You file your lawsuit secretly. to maintain not alerting the defendant who can retaliate against you. And the Justice Department reviews it. Obviously, in the modern era, they would reject all whistleblower type stuff and indeed try to harm you in those circumstances. And then only years later do you potentially go forward. That doesn't going to work in this era. We need those whistleblowers going public in front of these hearings and then going forward in essence, Chautauqua type things and find the best of the best. And we need the bar to work with folks, and we need to get the state legislators and some AGs really on board. That's why our first discussion right after June about this golden opportunity to get hearings involving Musk and such should be our entree when we talk to these state legislators, explaining the broader way they can bring all this truth to the surface where the public can learn it.
And yes, there's more to it, which we'll be revealing in due course here shortly. And Mark, I'll turn it to you for closing here. You don't have a lot of time unless you want to go a little bit longer, which I'm happy to go as long as you'd like to. But you've developed a plan because you've been thinking about this since we've introduced the new Untouchables and what your law firm's resources might be able to add to the, shall we say, response by those who really do champion democracy in a way that is going to be very clever in its approach to be able to turn the tables on this, authoritarian mess.
Yeah, well, let me just add a footnote. June raised this issue of Palantir and AI, and the provision of the big beautiful bill that's so odious that even Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't like it, which is the ban on regulating those folks. Every Democratic, a legislative Democrat in every state ought to be introducing a bill tomorrow to regulate AI, to regulate Palantir, to tamp, and there's villains and there's heroes that can be created, and those bills can be introduced. Again, if in the states like Ohio, where we have a Republican legislature, the Democrats could hold hearings on it without the Republicans, and bring in people. There are plenty of people in the AI industry are begging to be regulated because they want to live on a level playing field, and they fear for what the risk is to the future of the country, into fair competition, into the rule of law. So they ought to jump on that, and they ought to jump on it now. And that's a perfect thing to do while they're debating this stupid bill that's moving through the legislature. But I think everybody, and at big levels, at small levels, and I think that's what Patrick and I have been talking about. Lawyers, I think about it because that's what I do. As we talked about last week, it was small businesses that brought the international trade cart decision on the illegality of the imposition of the tariffs. Lawyers who represent small businesses need to encourage their clients to fight and bring those cases and find ways to make it economically feasible and pool their resources to be able to continue to challenge those economic barriers that the Trump administration is throwing in front of small businesses by challenging tariffs. We had a success this afternoon. Abrego Garcia is on his way home. I mean, now they're going to give him due process and then deport him probably. But he's on his way back, and so the rule of law prevailed, and lawyers stepped in to represent him. Everybody who gets arrested and deported ought to have access to a lawyer. And just like in the mortgage crisis, when we mobilized, 1,000 volunteer lawyers in Ohio to represent people who are facing foreclosure, in every state and every community where there's a large population of people of color from other countries, we should be organizing the bar to make sure that every single person who's detained is represented by a lawyer. Whether they have access to that lawyer or not, so that they can step in and their families have someplace to go to bring that lawsuit that will raise those issues and flood the courts, flood the zone with those lawsuits, defending those non-citizens, particularly the ones that they don't have any business being deported, but making sure that every single person who is arrested in this country and with actions taken as to their liberty has the modicum of due process that the Constitution provides. Those people can be heroes too. Representing the federal employees who are being discharged. There's some of them are unionized, but some of them aren't. And those that aren't unionized don't need access to good employment lawyers or people who can be quickly trained to be good employment lawyers, or even bad employment lawyers, to represent them and make sure that they're raising those issues, and challenging where it's possible to challenge. Local governments need to step up and hire lawyers. I talked to the county executive here in Cuyahoga County last night about opportunities that might arise to bring claims because they administer all the human services in the county. And when those human services are starting to get cut through extra judicial and extra legislative actions, like impounding funds, or clawing back funds, or canceling grants that were legally established by Congress, that those local governments have the fortitude, the intestinal fortitude to bring lawsuits challenging those things. Every local government's got lawyers. Every local government's got a community full of people who would be happy to represent them and take on those issues. But no attack on access to government services that have already been approved by Congress should be left behind. Same with nonprofits and community-based groups and arts groups that are facing this unilateral impoundment of congressionally appropriated funds. Those organizations, they have lawyers. Their lawyers need to step up and challenge those things in court. And again, it's going to make it's going to make federal judges' lives harder, but it's going to make our country better to understand that this is not going to go unresisted. What we have so many people still doing is still putting their heads in the sand and saying that, well, there's nothing I can do. I'm not even going to watch the news anymore. I don't want to know what's going on. Challenging these, bringing constitutional challenges. One of my colleagues here has spent the afternoon, the mini Trumps in Ohio want to take unclaimed funds to fund the Cleveland Browns Stadium, and later then a new stadium in Cincinnati. So they want to steal money that's constitutionally held on behalf of people who have Ohio citizens individually. They're going to raid that fund to build stadiums to be in exchange for a campaign contribution from Jimmy Haslam, who for $300,000 is going to get a $600 million. They're going to appropriate $600 million of money, including some of my money, because I have money in the unclaimed funds. We're gonna challenge the constitutionality if they pass that, and we'll know by the end of June. We're ready. We've already got a draft of a lawsuit to challenge the constitutionality of that extra legal action. These folks can't just do whatever they want to do. But we have been far too lax in letting that happen. The ACLU and the big nonprofits that do this stuff regularly, they're at absolute maximum capacity right now. There's not another. They don't have. I mean, and they're doing great. I mean, they're bringing the suits that need to be brought. But these little cases, these state level affronts, these institutional affronts or nonprofit affronts or local governments, they all need to be litigated and protected as well. Win or lose, the fight is the point.
Well, on that note, I think that's a brilliant way to close here, particularly again, this anniversary of D-Day, right? I mean, the galvanization of the forces and the resources and the tactics and everything that brought the greatest generation to the ability to, crush through Fortress Europe and the Nazi fascist defense mechanisms was something that we all know changed history for the world that folks like myself inherited, and have been so forthright to get people like Eric and I in a position to be able to do what the Supreme Court has called for. You want to be able to prove intent, you got to do the investigation. That's what we've been doing the whole time for the past 13 years, for the most part. And that's what led us to you. And we know that you guys are the vectors and the guiding light to be able to hopefully champion liberty and justice for all as we move forward against this darkness that we're all up against. So I'll thank you for your time. I'll say have a wonderful weekend, and I'll look forward to our next conversation as we plan for No Kings. All the best to you all.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks.
Are we still on, Patrick?